This is my self-cast Eye of Winter Poison build, and it's the first build I've been able to take to Uber DoT cap in hardcore. That's basically over 100 million regular DPS, and it's able to do this because of two main things. Firstly, my Eye of Winter looks like this. This really weird angle is through the divergent quality, which reduces the projectile shard angle or something like that the more you have. I go for something between 100 and 115% reduced angle, and I find this tends to be the sweet spot for maximizing single target when I'm personally doing bosses. The second reason I'm able to do this is because of the Crucible mod, and it's a Crucible mod that allows all damage from Eye of Winter to poison, not just the cold damage. This is really powerful because it lets us run the alt quality cold to fire support, which gives us a ton of increased damage when I'm running all this alt quality scaling. Even when you have this much damage though, when your Eye of Winter looks like this, the clear is really bad. So unfortunately what I've done is just made it into a complete Plague Bear Profane Bloom build. And honestly the mapping playstyle is literally just Profane Bloom and Plague Bear, not much to say about that. The highlight of this build is the extreme single target DPS you're able to achieve on hardcore without obviously abusing the Totem Explode mod. I've cleared 7 out of 7 Ubers and I put a VOD link in the description if you want to see raw footage of that. But for now, let's go over a really painfully detailed build. So first thing to mention is that I'm currently on a boss setup, and when I do my boss setup for this build, I actually unspec Profane Bloom, take Unholy Authority, and then unspec Whispers of Doom. The big thing about this build is that the tree is super tight. I think in terms of total nodes on the tree that give increased damage, I have like, I don't know, maybe 10 total nodes that actually give me ink damage. So most sources of ink damage are closer to like a more multiplier. Second thing to note, you're able to take both Frigid Wake and Withering Presence on this because it's a cold skill dealing cold damage, but that cold damage can then poison, again because of this Crucible modifier. Speaking of, let's go over all the gear first. I'm using an Oscillating Scepter. This gives me Elemental Overload without having to path over, and then I'm going for +1 cold skills, +1 all, cast speed, Chaos Dot Multi, Chaos Damage. Those sort of things are really good. Cold damage would also be quite strong. Over here in my shield, I have another repeat of the mod. Now, this doesn't apply twice, but allows that 15% chance for Eye of Winter to deal 100% more damage with poison to apply twice. So it's not double damage, but it's 15% more. This shield also gives me 20% spell suppression, which is really strong. That's basically a T1 roll. And then I also go for a little bit of life, cold spell skills, and then the crit chance isn't a bad thing because my Elemental Overload does need to proc for my damage to start really ramping up. On my helmet, I'm using an RE implicit, and then I use that focus duration. I'm stacking that focus duration mod with the glove mod also for focus cast speed. Other things I'd be looking for here are Fizz taken as on the implicit rather than reservation efficiency, and then looking for a reservation efficiency enchant like, I don't know, Determ, Grace, that sort of thing. Diala's Malefaction is the first mandatory unique on this. This gives a ton of alt quality scaling, and I really need this so I can scale my Divergent Eye of Winter to make it shoot in its really weird way. The +1 was super cool. I'm actually DoT cap without the +1. I'm actually DoT cap with like a level 15 or 16 gem or something like that. I'm well over that, and I should have scaled way more into defense. Gloves, I have Poison Chance. You don't actually need this. The other thing you could do for more Poison Chance, especially when running Blasphemy, is to take this Mastery, and that gives you 20% chance poison. I happen to hit it. I'd probably rather have Pierce on this, and then I run a Chaos Dot Multi, other implicit. Boots, Suppression, and then I also go for my Shock immunity here. This is from an Essence Craft. Action Speed, Faster Poison. Really great for this build. Ashes is the second mandatory unique, and this is again just for alt quality scaling, really jacking up that Divergent Eye of Winter. As far as rings go, cast speed, life, resistance, nothing too special here. You could look for min endurance charges if you were to use different grand spectrums. And then a belt is not important for its stats in particular, but the Stygian allows me to run an Abyssal Jewel for free, and this gives you your shock immunity. I aim for this immunity setup because as an occultist you do get chill and freeze immunity, so I feel like building full elemental element immunity isn't that worth it unless you're farming sim. Flasks kind of differ depending on the fight, but when I'm mapping I'll run a quartz, silver, quicksilver, and a granite flask. And then as far as unique jewels go, I have a Watcher's Eye, Determ, Haste. This one's really cool, especially that Haste one, because it allows your Withering Step to be on a lower cooldown. My 3 grand spectrums are Life, Min Endurance, Min Frenzy. An Immutable Force and Blood Notch combination really helps out my recovery, and this felt really good even without Petrified Blood, even without Progenesis. And finally I do run this Militant Faith over here. This is for 2 things. Firstly, reduced mana cost is really big. When you have a level 30 Eye of Winter being cast, the mana cost of this is crazy. It's 81 per cast. So even running Eldritch Battery, things are pretty expensive. And the second thing is that it gives you Power of Purpose. In my setup, that gives me roughly in the range of 3k armor, and that's really strong. The tree is a bit of a painful travel tree, and the biggest reason is because you really want to get reduced projectile speed on an Eye of Winter, even when you're scaling the alt quality. Firstly, it helps out with just getting the number of hits jacked up. In testing with this setup, I get roughly 20 hits. When I take this stuff out, in terms of a practical single target setting, I get closer to like 10 hits. The second thing is that this less projectile speed also helps to scale Eye of Winter's bottom line that says projectiles gain damage up to 200% more by the time they dissipate. The less projectile speed you have, the less Eye of Winter needs to travel in order to hit a really high damage threshold to scale that bottom line. Otherwise, this sort of tree is really nice because it gives you a ton of suppression, dexterity. I run one cluster setup here, though I would rather get a Voices if it was accessible in hardcore. You know, 3P would be really strong. Aura nodes over here, Steep and Profane when I'm doing this. While mapping, I run +1 Curse, and then I take this side for reservation efficiency for my Blasphemy setup. It's a pretty straightforward tree though that pretty much looks like any Occultist poison tree. The skill gems are when things get really annoying. So I run Eye of Winter and Power. Again, I'm super overcapped on DoT. I think like if I scale my gem level all the way down, yeah, I've got to go all the way down to level 16 gems. So this Empower 4 is definitely not mandatory. I definitely should have taken it out. Awaken Unbound is really strong for this build because you don't have a lot of poison duration scaling because you're not an assassin. Awaken Deadly is really great. And this Divergent Cold Fire is super cool because even as an unawakened gem, this is actually my strongest support, giving me 74% more damage. Firstly, because this mod is all damage from Eye of Winter can poison, fire damage can poison, and cold damage can poison. So you can use this as a base more multiplier of 30%. But that increased damage quality from Divergent gets scaled up by Dielas because I put it inside of a green socket, and that's just really strong. Finally, slower proj, even though it doesn't really increase your tooltip damage that much, other than the travel distance stuff, it is really powerful because it gives you more hits, and it just doesn't appear on the tooltip, but really powerful support, mandatory. CWDT Volmont Shell, good for, you know, any build with any amount of armor still, I think, especially because you have the ball skill. Flame Dash my movement skill instead of Frostblink because Frostblink doesn't pair well with Withering Step. In my gloves, I run a Purity. So this Purity gets cycled out depending on what fight I'm doing. When I'm mapping, this Purity actually becomes Blasphemy Despair instead. Determination, I run a Haste full time. This gets swapped out with Grace when I'm mapping, and then I run Haste on a Divine Blessing, and then Defiance Banner is my last primary aura. Curses get applied through an Arcanist brand Temp Chains. When I have my Blasphemy setup, I self-cast Temp Chains instead. And then for movement, I run a Shield Charge. No faster attacks because there's no space. And then over here, really important, Withering Step, I use Anomalous here. And when I pair this with Ashes and Stars and Enhance, I get 12 Wither stacks right away. Combine this then with Occultist Withering Presence, and then you're hitting max Wither at 3 seconds on a boss with only having to cast Withering Step 1 time, and it has a cooldown of like, I don't know, 1 second or something like that because of all the different kinds of scaling we have. Also, I run Divergent Plague Bear. This is really powerful for poison builds because it gives you DoT multi while infecting. Again, scaled up by Ashes, really great, scaled up by Enhance as well. Divine Blessing Malevolence is in my boss setup, and then I run a left-click Vortex because I need to proc Frigid Wake. Without left-click Vortex, my damage from cold hits is actually too small to apply Chill on bosses, and definitely too small to apply it on newer bosses. And lastly, I run a Divergent Herald of Agni. This gives me an absurd amount of poison chance. So all in all, this is a pretty cool build. I think it was really interesting how much damage I was able to pump out. And I know for a lot of you guys, this sort of damage isn't that impressive, but as far as in hardcore, I think it's relatively rare to actually hit damage over time cap. So I was really happy with how this build turned out, other than having the most generic poison playstyle possible.